So, right? What's holding up my coffee cup?
Jesus?
Yeah. Right?
Sunday school answer.
That's there you go. Always remember, Sunday school answer is usually right. But essentially, that's what we've proven true. Okay? This whole thing, this argument, might prove an unmoved mover, but it doesn't prove a God that cares anything about you. Right? We only learn that from Revelation. And we can only trust Revelation because the guy who rose from the dead said it was God's voice. Right? We'll get to that too. We'll get to Revelation as well. We can't, the men like Aristotle and the ancient philosophers, the Greeks, believed in this body-soul dualism, where what really mattered was the soul. It was kind of a, if you guys have heard the term Gnosticism before, it's kind of that idea. And it wasn't so much that the body didn't matter, but what lived on into eternity was actually the spirit. Your body, because what they observed was things would die, and they were no longer animated, and then the things would rot. So therefore, they discerned that what lives on into eternity is not your body. Right? It makes complete sense, unless you got a guy who rose from the dead. All right. But then when Aquinas comes along, what do you got? What?
Oh, he rose from the dead with his body.
Right. So when Aquinas comes along, he talks about death being the unnatural separation of the body and soul, and I think that's absolutely correct. It would be like, have you guys ever heard of this phenomenon where war vets who lose a limb in war, they'll have itches or they'll feel a pain in a limb that's not there? Well, imagine your whole body not being there, right? It would be, I had a buddy who lost a fingertip one time, and he was like passed out from shock because like part of his body was separated from his from his consciousness. This is something that the human psyche can't, just the notion of think about getting your hand chopped off, right? It's horrifying, right? Or having your ear chopped off or something like that, These sorts of things. And the reason that is because I think Aquinas was absolutely right. That the separation from the separation of the soul from the body would be like amputating your whole, having your whole body amputated. It would be, you wouldn't be you without your body, right? But we don't get that from this, right? We don't get the resurrection of the body from this. We only get it from this. Okay. So that's kind of how I wanted to wrap this up. All right. Questions, comments, concerns on this? Again, I would, I would pick up Fraser's book, Five Proofs of God. I have it. I'm finishing it up now. It's pretty good. It's not too hard to read. Sometimes it gets a little complicated, and you have to slow down a bit. But you guys can handle it, I think. Be a good book for you to read if you're interested. Okay. All right. There we go. There we go. Now, we're going to talk about when Lutheranism started. This is my request from one of y'all's parents, so I'm going to do this thing. I got a good bit on this, so we'll do that. Okay, I think that's a good marker, I hope. Okay, so when did Lutheranism start? Anybody know? Go.
Garden of Eden.
Bingo! Thank you. You just ruined my bit. A lot of people will say 1517 or 1589. Nope, started in the Garden of Eden. The first Lutherans were Adam and Eve. Right? Okay. Genesis. Well, you could say, I've heard some people say it started when man and woman were created. You had the first church. Right, really? But I guess technically, I don't know if maybe you could comment on this. I think technically to have the church, you have to have fallen man, because you have to have a savior, And then, I don't know.
It's a fascinating thing. So this is something that I've heard about, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
Yeah.
And something that's kind of hard to wrap your head around is that they basically have just entire freedom.
Mhm.
They're given freedom to do whatever. And they're given just a few commands. And only one of those commands is really sort of a public command,
Right.
right? So there's like, go have kids. There's work, like, work the garden.
Yeah.
And then there's, don't eat from this tree, right? So you can gather together to work, and that's sort of an obedience to God that could be considered a form of worship. But I have heard this theory that if there was a church in the garden before the fall, and we don't know how long there was before the fall, it doesn't seem like very long from the Bible, but it also doesn't say. The church would have been right in front of that tree.
Yeah.
Because they wouldn't experience temptation the same way we do, and so we would run away from the tree. Like,
Yeah.
don't go near the tree; it's gonna kill you.
Mhm.
But they would see that as a way that they could worship God by obeying His command,
Right.
by not eating from the tree.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know that you need a fallen man to have worship in that sense.
Right.
You can delight in God's commands,
Sure.
and obviously,
Right.
you can tell from the text in Genesis that Adam has been preaching to Eve.
Ah, right. Because she knows.
She knows the stuff that God said.
Yep.
And in fact, some elaboration on it.
Yep.
So he's not just reading straight from the Bible, he's also preaching.
Yep.
So, I mean, I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah.
It's obviously not the same kind of church that we have. But I don't know that you can say it's not church.
Right.
Anyway.
Right.
If there's preaching in God's word and, praise and worship, what else do you call that?
Right. Yeah. Okay. So the point, so that's good. The church starts in Genesis. The fall happens. We got, as we've seen before, the promised seed of the woman is given to Eve. Genesis 3:15, this area. Okay. So the church starts there, right? And what does Luther say marks the church? Well, one marker is like Mr. Pullman said, preaching of the word. Okay. Where Luther, the official statement is where the word is rightly preached and the sacraments are rightly administered. Okay. Clearly going on in Genesis.
Well, and what's the second story in Genesis? Or the story after the fall?
Yeah.
It's Cain and Abel.
Right.
And what's the first part of that story? Cain and Abel are doing what? They're offering sacrifices.
Right.
Right. So, which is the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Sacrament.
Sacraments. Right.
And so that's like the first thing we see after they get kicked out of the garden is they're administering the sacraments.
Yeah.
And again, clearly there's been preaching of the word because what God said.
Right. So just on an aside there, always recognize that whatever you see in the Old Testament, unless the New Testament explicitly changes the means by which that's going to. So for instance, Cain and Abel are sacrificing. That's sacramental in nature. Now the Lord changed that into the supper, right? So kind of all the sacrifices are subsumed into that sacrament we do now. Whereas before they had a bunch of them. There's a bunch of different ways you can do this, which everybody thinks that would be so cumbersome. I'm not so sure. I mean, I don't know. It probably was, I guess, in a sense. But to have to do all these sacrifices, you got all these rules, you have to follow that sort of thing. But I kind of like the rules. I like the ceremonies. I like the different things that are done in the church. I wish we had more of that stuff.
It's not that hard to figure out with it. We
No.
do all kinds of stuff like that without thinking about it.
Right. So yeah, we look at that because it's so foreign to us. We think, that must have been so cumbersome and burdensome. Well, maybe. Obviously you see that today. If you go to, all right, I'll just say this. If you go to the church that Amelia's at this morning, I won't say what it's called, you'll see how people have abandoned the ceremonies and practices that have marked the church throughout history, okay?
They never abandoned them, though. They just replaced them with worship.
Well, true, that's true. It's interesting, we'll talk about that, we'll get to it. It's interesting what people replace the sacraments with. It's really interesting. But they do. Everybody has sacraments. It's just a matter of what they replace them with. Okay. So here's where the Lutherans started. And I say that because we say we are the true church. The Romanists say they're the true church, and we say, no, you're not. We're the true church. We're the faithful ones. Okay? And don't be ashamed to say that. A lot of people are like real sheepish about this sort of thing. Whoa, you guys think you're absolutely right? And I'm like, yeah, we do. If I didn't think we were absolutely right, I wouldn't be here. You think you're absolutely right too, or as right as you can be. If you thought that there was somebody else that had the goods on this better than this, why are you there? Move over to them. Don't give me this, we all should be humble in our knowledge of this sort of, no. We think we're right. And in fact, you guys, by the time you go out into the world and I'm done with you, you're going to be able to prove it pretty easily, right? You're going to be able to show how the Lutherans have the goods on this stuff, right? Okay. So we say we're the true church. Now, Luther, if you were called a Lutheran when the denomination emerged as Lutheran, or the church emerged as Lutheran, that was a slander, generally speaking. Yeah, what were you going to say?
No, a few things. When did that start happening?
When did they start calling them Lutherans?
I guess when did we start calling ourselves Lutherans? Because in Germany, they're still called evangelicals.
Yeah. Well, that's what Luther and Melanchthon, I can't remember. I'm looking at this list. It's what Luther and Melanchthon wanted to be called, was evangelical. Right. But they thought, well, that's what they're calling us, so we'll just go with it.
It never changed officially in Germany, as far as I can tell. Anyway, the other thing I was going to say is, it's too bad we all left right before the reading from the Book of Concord today. Yeah. Because they're reading The Power and Primacy of the Pope.
Right.
The Power and Primacy of the Pope.
Yep.
And they had just finished up giving the evidences from the Word of God.
Yep.
And then the writers of that particular document, which was, is that Melanchthon?
Yeah, it's Melanchthon, yeah.
Yeah, so Melanchthon, and the people who included it in the Book of Concord saw fit to then make the argument from church history. Yeah. So it's not just an argument of we're right because we can prove it, but also we're right because we have been the church. Right. We're not abandoning the tradition. You are. You have, yeah. Right? And so here's the tradition. Yep. Here's what's actually happened in the history of the church. And you guys have walked away from it, not us.
Right. That's precisely right.
So
So when this all first started up, when it was, to be called a Lutheran was a slander. So, and so was being a Christian, right? We read, we didn't read the Octavius when we were studying the proofs of Jesus. Did we read that? I can't remember. Anyway, I have it here. So here's what they used to be Christian. That name used to be a slander as well. Here's what the Octavius of Minicus Felix says from 2nd century. Christians have gathered from the lowest dregs of society, the more unskilled men and gullible women. Christians gathered from the lowest dregs of society, the more unskilled men and gullible women, to establish an unholy conspiracy held together by nightly meetings, solemn fasts, and inhuman foods. This confederacy ought to be rooted out and destroyed. They know one another by secret marks and signs, and they love one another almost before they know one another. You Christians are the worst breed ever to affect the world. You deserve every punishment you can get. Nobody likes you. It would be better if you and your Jesus had never been born. We hear that you are all cannibals. You eat the flesh of your children at your sacred meetings. We hear that you meet in secret before sunrise, and the gross immorality that we hear that goes on in those places is repulsive, especially brothers and sisters loving one another. Okay? So, and it was interesting. I went on to, I don't want to disrupt the live stream. I wish I would have written this down. But I went on to Catholic Answers last night and saw, what Catholics are saying about Lutherans, and it's about the same thing. It was hilarious. There was a whole thread just smearing Lutherans, telling us how evil we were and misguided, and some of them were generous and said, oh, well, they're just really, really misguided. They just have no idea what they're talking about, type idea. It is. It was hilarious. It's pretty funny. I'll read it. I'll show it to you guys later. But yeah,
Real quick, in the Bible, Paul doesn't refer to the people as Christians. What does he call them? Followers of the way?
Yeah.
Right, so again, in the same way, like, they had the name that they wanted for themselves,
Right.
and then they end up with this smear that
Right.
they're just like, fine.
It's interesting. And you'll see that throughout the history I'm getting ready to present. You'll see that pretty much all the denominations, the names of them were smears on them. They were, to call somebody a Baptist really goes back to another word which we invented. I don't know if we invented it, but anyway, we'll get to it. All right, so this is 7,000 BC, somewhere in that area. Okay, maybe a little later, earlier. Not totally sure. Are you sure? Okay.
I thought it was 4,004.
Right, that's what I said. There are some. I was looking at this last night. That's the number I always quote, 7,000. But then I was looking at some that were like, oh no, it was precisely 5,000. Blah blah blah. And I'm like, yeah, right. Some people get really crazy with this. I like the answers in Genesis people generally, but they get a little nutty with this dating stuff. They think, oh, we got this right, precise, bam, dialed it right in. I'm like, no, you didn't. Okay, so we have the church here, and then continuing on, right? We have Old Testament saints. How were the people in the Old Testament saved? Because they obeyed the Ten Commandments? They followed the Jewish law code? Nadia, what do you think? Huh?
Because they believed that Christ was going to come?
Yeah.
They still believed it even though it wasn't going to happen?
There you go. Look at Genesis 15. Right? Yeah, that's right. That's right. You're exactly right. Genesis 15. Oops. 5 through 6, right?
Okay. And he brought him outside and said, "Look toward heaven and number the stars, if you are able to number them." Then he said to him, "So shall your offspring be." And he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness.
There you go. Right? He believed the Lord. And we see in the book of Hebrews that the writer of the book here says, by faith, Abraham was saved. Okay? Counted to him as righteousness, reckoned. The theologians use the word impute to give righteousness. So that's one thing that Paul is very explicit about in the book of Romans, is that Christ's righteousness, all of his good deeds, his works, and you'll hear all our preachers and pastors, you should hear this, talk about how Christ gave us took our sin, took our unrighteousness, and gave us his righteousness. Okay? It'd be like, because Luther calls this the happy exchange. Right? That's the idea. And that's how the Old Testament saints were saved. They were saved looking forward. So everything you see in the Jewish law code pertains to this. All the sacrifices, those, especially the sin offerings, these sorts of things. Some of them were praise offerings and that didn't pertain to the forgiveness of sin. But the big deal days, like I believe what do they call it? The Yom Kippur. That's the Day of Atonement. That's a big deal day. Why? Well, for Jews, they think they're getting their sins forgiven, but the reason it's a big deal day is because it points to Christ, or it should point to Christ. We really don't need Yom Kippur anymore because Christ has been crucified. This is the whole point that the writer of Hebrews is making. Yeah? So, that's what, and again, we looked at that last year, and we can go back through it again. That's what we looked at last year when we talked about how, when we're reading our Old Testament, we're going to look for where Jesus is there, right? Because the Old Testament saints were saved by faith in the Messiah, not yet. We're saved by the Messiah that has come and is coming. Right? Does that make sense? Cross here. Old Testament saints, New Testament saints, right? Whoops, should be like this kind of thing, right? Make sense? Pretty simple. Okay. So the church is here. Still have the church. So we have Adam and Eve. Here's the church. And we have Old Testament saints. And then we have our first church split when Christ is born and rises from the dead, right? So at about, well, we'll just call it 0 or 0 to 33. You split from the church. Right? This happened. Some of the Jews stayed in the church and believed in Christ. Some were converted, like St. James and St. Paul. But many, like Caiaphas and many of the Pharisees, didn't believe. Refused to believe. Or maybe believed intellectually, but still rejected the Messiah. At any rate, so this is somewhere, we'll just call it that, right? So, you have the Jews splitting off from the church. Church goes on, right? New Testament saints. You buying this so far, Mr. Coleman? Right?
You're missing a few splits, but fine.
We're missing a few splits.
Yeah, there's constant splits. Where do you think all those Gentiles came from?
Well, okay, fair enough. Well, that's okay. I'm probably trying to be a little more broad than that. I guess you're right about that. Yeah, that's true. If you think about it, if the church started with Adam and Eve, where do we get all these Gentiles? Tower of Babel, maybe idea.
Well, there's that. I mean, you look at the way that the Jews behave in Canaan.
Yeah.
I mean, there's constant splits there. There's points at which what does God say? There's 7,000 faithful left in the entire world.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of splits going on.
Right. No, that's.
And then I think the reason I think it's important is because we want to recognize that there wasn't this 7,000 year period or 4,000 or whatever you want to say, where the church was totally fine.
Right.
Everybody was good.
That's true.
Everybody was faithful, and then all of a sudden we started having these splits all the time.
That's
right. And Paul's point in Romans 9, where he talks about how we were grafted into this tree.
Yeah.
And how the Jews, like you say, have split off.
Yeah.
He says, don't let that make you arrogant, because you were also unfaithful and you were grafted back in, and they can just as easily be grafted back in. So everybody who's not in the church, you were in that group too. Right? And so everybody needs to be grafted back in. So anyway.
That is a good point, because here you have, where did all these pagan nations come from? Well, if we believe that Adam and Eve were everyone's parents and were in the church, and everyone was in the church, where do these Gentiles come from? Maybe from Cain's descendants, these sorts of things. All this started to crop up. Unbelief started to emerge, and you had a lot of, what do they call it? Synergism? Synergism? Not synergism. It's just synergism. Where you kind of accept the false doctrines of other religions into your own. That doesn't matter. It's a technical term. But anyway, so you have these splits. So we have Jews and Gentiles and Christians still. So that's basically your three. I'm glad you brought that up. So you still have the church here going on. But now you have Gentiles, Jews, and Christians. Right, essentially. Now, obviously, among the Gentiles, there's all kinds of different ways they worship. Pagan worship, worship Mars if you're a soldier. Okay. Or Ceres, if you're a farmer, type of thing. Jews, don't think Jews were monolithic either. Yet, even if you look in the New Testament, you have the Pharisees, who are very different from the Sadducees, right? What they call them, Sadducees. I think I've made this joke before. They don't believe in the resurrection, and so therefore they're sad, you see, right? Cheesy, I But that's true. They didn't. This is something that the Pharisees and the Sadducees debated all the time because the Sadducees didn't believe in a resurrection. And it is. Well, you can make a really solid case for the resurrection from the Old Testament, but it's not easy. Okay? You have to know your Old Testament. You have to be able to argue from it. All right. You had, so you had, right. You had Pharisees, Sadducees, you had Essenes. You had a group called the Sicarii, which were militant Jews. They called them Sicarii because the Sicarii was like a shiv, a little knife they used to carry around with them. Small faction of them.
It's Barabbas, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, Barabbas was a Sicarii. Okay. So anyway, the point is that Mr. Pullman's making, and I'm trying to make, is that, the Catholics will accuse us, Lutherans in particular, of splitting up the church. And we go, oh, please. The church has always been split up. Don't give us that nonsense. It's always been this way. This is what happens in a fallen world. Stuff fragments. Relationships break. And it's always been this way. Okay. But the church, as we'll see, will remain. Just like Jesus promised. And that's a good place to end. See you guys next week. Well, I'll talk to you guys about all another time.
Do all the New Testament splits next week.
Yeah. We will get there. All of them. Well, they boiled down.
Start with Judaizers.